Donald Trump, 254 electoral votes to Hillary Clinton's 209. He is on the verge, potentially, of winning the presidency of the United States. Sean Hannity joins us now by phone. Sean, your thoughts on this night?
Hey, guys, how are you? By the way, you got to get Juan Williams off that ledge he's on right now. We got to help him. Look, Brett, what everybody has missed here is Donald Trump has had to go against a Republican establishment, a Democratic establishment, a media establishment, a globalist establishment. And fundamentally, the main thing that they've been missing in all of this is very basic, and that is we have 13 million more Americans in poverty, 13 million more Americans on food stamps, 8 million more in poverty, the lowest labor participation rate since the 70s, the lowest home ownership rate in 51 years, the worst recovery in 40 years. And if you look abroad, I heard you talking about this earlier, you know, how's the world going to react to Donald Trump being president? I think there's going to be a healthy bit of fear, which, by the way, I don't think they would have had with either Hillary or Barack Obama. Fear in a good sense that America is going to rebuild its military and probably not get involved in foreign conflicts. To me, this was predictable, but on the other hand, this is a modern-day political miracle you're witnessing before your eyes right now. And that is to go up against everybody and all the pundits and all the pollsters and all the prognosticators out there and defy all the odds. And it's the American people that have said enough is enough. They're tired of the corruption, the cesspool, draining the swamp. All of these things were resonating. You know, when you look at a state like Wisconsin, what are they saying? They want their jobs back. They want the labor participation rate to be lower. In other words, more people having jobs. They want America to be energy independent. They're tired of a horrible educational system. They're tired of Obamacare rates going through the roof. This is not complicated. What's happening now is not working. And these guys, and Donald Trump has gone out there and he outworked Hillary Clinton and he put forward a much better agenda. And America said enough is enough with failed policies. That's what this election was about.
Sean, it's Megan here. Question for you.
Hi.
Just a couple of weeks ago, you were walking into the studio, right as my hour was ending, you were coming in, and it was the night of the Comey announcement, and you were relieved and were feeling like it was a game changer, like it was going to restart momentum. Do you feel like that was the moment, that was the tipping point that switched things back after what had been a hideous month for Trump, or was it something else? What was it?
You know, I think it's all the things I just mentioned, Megan, and I remember the night well. I put my hands up in the air and I said, we're back in the game. We're back in the game. But, you know, fundamentally, you know, what drives elections? Peace and prosperity. America's not prosperous. America's not working. Hillary lied about her emails, lied about Benghazi. She's corrupt. She's so dishonest. Look at the exit polls tonight. And at the end of the day, you know, is Donald Trump like every other person? Are we all flawed? Have we all sinned and fallen short? Yeah. And maybe he wasn't spending his entire life running for president, which is why he probably went on the Howard Stern show. If my plan is to run for president, I probably wouldn't go on Howard's show. And with that said, Americans saw through that, and they saw a guy that was really successful and really had a dream that America could be a lot better. Look, we have nearly 50 million Americans in poverty, nearly 50 million Americans on food stamps, 95 million Americans out of the labor force. These are millions of our fellow citizens that are suffering. Things are getting worse. This president's taken on more debt than every other president before him combined. And Americans are looking at their children and grandchildren and say, this is immoral. This has to stop. And that is the reason why I felt confident coming into tonight that he had a very good chance, although a difficult path, as we've been following the news all night. And he was able to pull it off because the American people, deep down inside, they cut through the clutter, they cut through the noise, they cut through all the spin, and they said, we're not on the right path.
Sean,
and that's what drove tonight's election.
Yeah, go ahead, Brett.
Is this a country that has changed its demographics? Is it a country that is now, as you say, ready to kick the table over and say Washington doesn't work? Where do you see the state of the country right now?
I think the state of the country is simple, Brett. You know, look, it's not that complicated if you really think about it. For example, is it really that hard to get away from NEA top-down education run from Washington, Common Core standards, or better to give it back to states and local municipalities? You know, when Washington promises keep your doctor, keep your plan, and save $2,500 per family a year, and people lose their doctor's plans and are paying, on average, $4,100 a year more, and then they're seeing increases next year of 100%, you know what? They begin to realize they've been lied to. When they see a foreign policy where there's 600 requests before the Benghazi attack, and our government did nothing, they say government's failing. When brave men and women fight, bleed, and die in Mosul, Ramadi, Fallujah, and Tikrit, and Baghdad, and then we pull out and create an opening for ISIS, they say that's a failure. When you give $150 billion to the #1 state sponsor of terror, that is a failure. And on every objective measure, you know, thank God the American people, this is about one thing. They see that Washington is broken. And by the way, Republicans are just as guilty. Paul Ryan is not going to be the Speaker of the House in January. I was going to save that for my program tomorrow. He's not going to be the Speaker. His state went for Donald Trump tonight. I mean, it's an amazing turn of events because the establishment on both sides, Republican and Democrat, have lost touch with the real lives of real Americans that are really suffering. And Donald Trump has now opened the door and said, we're going to fix it and we're going to turn that table over. And you know what? I wish him all the best because it's not going to be easy because all the same people that opposed him in the lead up to tonight are going to be opposing him tomorrow.
Sean, have you spoken with him tonight at all?
About 3 times, yes.
What did he say? What's the mood? If whatever you can share.
You know, he's kind of superstitious. Like I've talked to him nights before he'd do debates and said, I don't want to talk about it. I don't, you know. So he's kind of been, you know, just holding his breath like the rest of us and waiting and watching. And you know, I think he's very sober about it. And I think, you know, he's a guy that loves a big challenge. I mean, when you think of, you know, it's not something I do, although I worked in the building industry, hanging wallpaper and painting and framing and laying tile. But if you take a piece of land and you say, all right, I'm going to build a, you know, 150 stories and go straight up, it's a pretty ambitious project. And I think he views this the same way. That
do you think even he had an understanding that he might win this thing tonight? I mean, of course, you always hope and you think, but realistically, because some of the messaging we got out of the team, the Trump team early in the evening was like, well, you know, we wish we had more support, but it didn't seem like even they expected this.
I told him yesterday and I told him tonight, do not believe the exit polls. No matter what happens, don't buy it. And, you know, when the exit polls came in, sure enough, I mean, you guys were both on the call. It didn't sound good for Donald Trump early on. And I just felt that, you know, like what we have seen in Great Britain. Look, I'm going to tell you other issues that are resonating. You know, the fact that our borders are wide open and you have 95 million Americans out of the labor force, and then you have 11 million people that didn't follow the law and the rule of law, competing for jobs and driving down wages. To the average person that's out of work, that's a big deal. You know, to look at ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the threat that they pose to this country, and we see what happened in Chattanooga and Orlando and San Bernardino and what's happening in Europe, the fact that we have open borders seems really dumb to the average person. The idea that Hillary, behind closed doors, according to WikiLeaks, says we can't vet refugees, but she's going to increase the number of refugees by 650%. The average American saying, maybe Donald Trump's right. We can take care of people and be compassionate with safe zones in Syria and provide military support and food and water and blankets and medicine and supplies and baby formula. But maybe if you come from a culture that says you can tell women how to dress and you can tell women they can't drive and a man can tell women whether or not they get to go to school or work, maybe that's too big a conflict for a constitutional republic that we live under. And how do we ascertain what's in somebody's heart as to whether or not they're coming to America because they want the aspiration of freedom and the opportunity that we provide, or do they want to proselytize, indoctrinate, and advance a caliphate? You can't determine what's in someone's heart.
Sean, it looks like tonight that the U.S. Senate will be in Republican control. thin
Yeah, it does.
majority, but looks like a Republican control. The U.S. House of Representatives will be obviously in Republican control. If it is a President-elect Trump, what would you tell him about working with a Republican House and a Republican Senate?
I'd actually tell the Senate and the House to work with him. I think he's laid out a vision and an agenda for the country on borders, on refugees, on education, on Obamacare, healthcare savings accounts, trying not to be as interventionist as perhaps we've been in the past, especially after the pullout in Iraq, which I think was a major mistake. And, you know, I think his agenda on energy is so important. We can create millions of jobs in the energy sector. I think the idea of lowering tax rates for corporations and allowing trillions to be repatriated, I think there's a huge model here that represents the Reagan model and the Kennedy model that led to in the case of Reagan, up to that point, the longest period of peacetime economic growth in history. So I think if he follows that agenda, I would think the only issue he might have with some Republicans in the Senate and the House may be over trade, but, you know, I'm a free trader, but I also believe in fair trade. And some of these deals have been, you know, look at Wisconsin and Michigan, so detrimental to those people. You know, if we can bring trillions of dollars from the energy sector and big corporations that are tired of paying the rates this country charges, one of the highest in the industrialized world, reverse it to one of the lowest, will incentivize them to build factories, bring back trillions, and manufacturing centers here. It'll be amazing.
Sean Hannity, there were not a lot of people at the beginning who believed you when you talked about this. It looks like tonight...
By the way, Brett, there were people ready to rip my head off at the end of tonight. Trust me, I'm well aware of that.
Sean, we're watching history tonight, no matter what happens.
Yes, sir. We are, indeed.
Thank you for the phone call.